So, yeah, and both of these, I'll close with two poems that have teaching in them, because of course I'm a teacher, and I know some of you are teachers, and these I'm going to dedicate these to Alicia, who is an inspiring teacher as well as an inspiring poet. Every fall I think about the children out there learning to write, and how, like, our learning to write and how it revolutionized our bodies and our minds, and how amazing it was. The letters learn to breathe twice. When the danger of fire has passed, the children, even when wanting to text, form letters with pencils, tracing gray skin around the unsayable, while geese honk overhead, in their wedge of funny adults. The children try to be normal, though no one knows what normal is. In nearby gardens, the unwanted dandelion, Taraxacum officinale, a large squash prepares for harvest its S-shaped stem with moisture bent. Children braid languages, and some are praised for confidence, but who praises the garden for all that breath? The cheerful, mild, constant anxiety of your childhood turned to writing. Then meaning came with its invincible glare. The page had borders but no limit, and you loved letters then. Their breath allowed not to decide as it curved between skin bearer and the being said. And I'll close with a poem that Alicia asked me to read. It's a poem. Thank you for being a great audience, and I'm happy to answer a few questions. I think we have some time, and we can chat if you want to chat about something. And this is the poem Air in the Epic, and it's in two columns like this on the page, and there are twice as many words on the left side as there are on the right, and I meant it to be a kind of line that called up a weaving, a shuttle-looking shape. Further on in this book, there's a poem, String Theory Sutra, which is really about the Industrial Revolution and the development of subjectivity. And I wanted the effect of the poem to be like a machine that was making a shuttle, making a fabric. And the other thing I should tell you about this poem is that it was written in relation to things that I teach at St. Mary's. We teach the Greek thought tradition, and I really think a lot in my activism about how seriously violence and literature go hand in hand. And that's, I don't have strong judgment or hatred about that fact, but it is true that a lot of our literature is based on subjects of war, and so we're sort of stuck with that. Anyway, we had just taken a hike in the Sierra. This is a poem that was begun at Squaw Valley and altered radically. Air in the Epic. On the undermothered world in crisis, the omens agree. A come here follows for reader and hero through the named winds as spirits are lifted through ragged, colorful O's on butterflies called fritillaries, tortoise shells, and blues, until their vacation settles under the vein of an aspen leaf like a compass needle stopped in an avalanche. The students are moving. You look outside the classroom where construction trucks find little Troys. Dust rises, part pagan, part looping. Try to describe the world, you tell them, but what is a description? For centuries, people carried the epic inside themselves. Past the old weather stripping, a breeze is making some sixth vowel sounds. That will side with you on the subject of syntax as into the word wind they go. A flicker passes by, air let out of a Corvette tire. Side stories leaked into the epic, told by its lover, the world. The line structure changed, voices grew to the right of all that. The epic is carried into school, then to scooped-out chairs. Scratchy holes in acoustic tiles pull from paperbacks. There's a type of thought between trance and logic where teachers rest, and the mistake you make when you're tired is not breathing. The class is shuffling, something an island drink might cure or a citrus goddess. They were mostly raised in tank-like SUVs called Caravan or Quest. Winds rarely visited them. Their president says global warming doesn't exist. Some winds seem warmer here, Warriors are extra light, perhaps from ponies galloping across the plains. Iphigenia waits for winds to start. Winds stowed in goatskins were meant to be released by wise men, Gus and Shiroko's, Chinooks, Hamsines, Whooshes, Blisses, Catabatics, Santa Anas, and Ferns. Egyptian birds were thought to be impregnated by winds. The Chinese god of wind has a red and blue cap like a Red Sox fan. Students dislike even thinking about Agamemnon. You love the human species when you see them, even when they load their backpacks early and check the tiny screens embedded in their phones. A ponytail holder switches with light, beguiled. Iphigenia waits for the good. Calchas and her father have mistaken the forms of air. Zephyr, Boreas, Eurus, the grouchy east breeze, and Notos, the bringer of rains. Maybe she can see bones in the butterfly wings before they invent the X-rays. Her father could have removed the sails and rowed to Troy. Nothing makes sense in war, you say. Throw away the hunger and the war's all gone. There's a section between the between of joy and terror where sailors know they shouldn't open the sack of winds. It gives the gods more credit. An oracle is just another nature. There's a space between the two beeps of a dump truck where the voice can rest. Their vowels join the names of winds in white acoustic tiles. A rabbit flies across the field with Zephyr right behind. Wind comes from when warm air descends. The imagined comes from the imagined. Thank you. So, does anybody have a few quick questions or anything you want to talk about that's on your mind? Or yes?
This is kind of a question that I had last night, and I sort of have it today, and it comes from, just kind of years of readership of your poetry and the way it's evolved, and thinking about activism and politics and the way this is becoming a conversation, so much in your books. And I guess I would love to hear you talk about, I feel like with Fortress and Bright Existence and Death Tractates, there was so much earlier version of poetry that I got to know really evolved. And I just wonder what relationship, if that's kind of a foundational relationship that you have, and if you feel like a lot of your concerns grow from that, or what the relationship between all those two types of concerns are for you.
So between that sort of spiritual investigation and it's interesting because I had a sense during the years that I was writing, and I think of Fortress and Bright Existence and Death Tractates as kind of related, even though Fortress comes from a much more narrative style, as being a kind of basis for psychological, how to say it, a kind of adventure that I think I was doing, a lot of women were doing, or are still doing, but they came out of the sense that that you kind of had to figure yourself out or grow, you know, in relation to your own project as a human being and as an individual. And I was reading, as you probably know, Gnostic texts, and was really interested in the idea that there's a very vast invisible world that we're not going to quite get access to. And I still think that, actually. But the world is, since the maybe early 90s or something like that, much more, I think of it as much more imminent or much more inhabited by an animating presence that is much less lonely, I think. I mean, just to put it that bluntly. I'm still really interested in Gnosticism and that the sort of esoteric traditions, especially as I find so much of it in popular culture. I mean, even like The Matrix or something is very Gnostic. But I guess I'm much more interested in the idea that everything we have and need is here, and it's also someplace else. And we don't really have access to that someplace else very much, which I think of as heaven, and I don't think of it as like the designer heaven and from fundamentalist traditions or anything like that, but there's a way that I think it's probably maybe even like a Swedenborgian notion that what's here has a correspondence in another world that's exactly the same or something. But what's here seems very inhabited right now, and not just by the human, but by all the animating forces. So that kind of took over as a project, and it seemed to me that investigating the elements was kind of the way that happened. That, when I started to think about like the earth spirits, and that rocks really might have consciousness that we don't know about, and they really might. I mean, it really might be that mountains have consciousness or something, like, not, little people running around in there, but some other kind of consciousness, some other kind of even molecule. And when people, rationalists, sort of think that that's an absurd thought, but since we don't know what matter is, or antimatter, since we really don't know what the composition of the universe even is, it seems arrogant to think that that's not possible. So I guess spiritual investigation and my impatience with the cruel narrowness of human behaviors toward each other, and this kind of hopeful search through environmental issues and writing and all have kind of come together that way. So it's not, I guess it's not, what I'm trying to say is it's not separate so much anymore. It doesn't seem quite so separate. Yeah. And I did have the sense that, when you're younger, you're thinking about your autobiography in your poetry, and so you do start your investigations with like what's happening in your life, in your own psychology, and so you start way deep inside yourself, and if you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and then you start going out, and it just goes out and out and out, and that's how I wanted my poetry to be shaped, so that it would be out deeper and then out and out and out, and that's sort of how I thought it would be interesting. Yes.
You've talked before about how you use trance
Uh-huh.
at times for your process, and can you just say a little bit more about that, and like how you came to that, and how it helped you see things in that strange way that you see them?
Yeah, well, I worked with a Jungian hypnotherapist from about the early 80s, really. And actually it was a couple, and then she died, and I wrote death tractates about her. And the hypnotherapy was a kind of way of having the dream when you're awake. And to me, it's a very effective way of doing therapy, because it's not just sort of talking out in kind of rational memory or anything like that, like conventional Freudian therapy. You just go deep into an image, and then you talk your way through the image, and just these odd things will come up, and then you talk to the therapist about the image. And I learned to do it myself a few years into it, or like 5 or so years into it. And it's been really helpful for my poetry. And I'm trying to write a little bit about it, and I've written a chunk of prose about it, and some of it's going to be in Kristen Prevelet is editing an issue of, I think it's Drunken Boat, and she's going to print some of it. So it's just kind of, it's not particularly about the technique. I'm trying to write a little bit more about the technique as I go along, but it's an incredible thing to sort of learn how to be awake while you're in a dream, you know. And it's very interesting and really good for poetry, I think. And so I found it good to as a kind of alternative from, you know, when you're in a very stressful state, to just do a little bit of trance work like that. And I think poets can do it pretty easily, or pretty well, because, you know, we just have access to our imaginations more easily, and I mean the visual imagination too, more easily than a lot of people. I think that's part of what draws us to poetry, you know. But I mean, in physical terms, I just yeah, it's not easy to do at first, but then you can learn to do it, and I think you know, there are practitioners that they can help you learn to do it, and then you can learn to do it for yourself. It's really good for your poetry, though. I recommend it. Any other questions at all? Yes.
In the past 2-ish months, with the Occupy movements happening and becoming more and more publicized, as well as your obvious relationship with Libya and Libya's poets, how have you seen your poetry changing, like, within the past months, and what do you see the role of the poet in America regarding these happenings?
This period? Well, I had a strange reaction at first. I sort of, when the Occupy, you know, in mid-September, and the Occupy movement started, and I thought, you know, because I've been working with Code Pink since 2004, and I thought, what took you guys, you know? I had like this sort of mom response, like, okay, about time you showed up, like, we're getting effing tired over here. But in fact, it hasn't been possible to wake America up to stop this thing in time until young people got with the program. And I mean young people and disadvantaged, and I mean, you know, downtrodden people and people who this economic thing has affected. And until people were ready, like something, it was almost like something snapped. I'm working on these strange fire poems, and they're about the seasons. So whatever happens in a season, whether it's a, you know, weird spiritual condition or an external thing, or moaning at the gas pump or whatever, I'm going to try to make the short poem come together. So I wouldn't say that there's, you know, I have set out to write about Occupy, but I went to the general strike, for instance, in Oakland, and I was marching in that. I did not, there was a building takeover, and I didn't participate in that one, but but I did have the strong sense that I needed to be there as a poetic presence, and a bunch of my students and poet friends were there, and we were marching along, and I was thinking, oh, we're going to all have different experiences here. And we talked about this a lot last night, but I feel really strongly, just in answer to the second part of your question, that poetry has to be taken out and that the outside has to be taken in, you know, so that the need for interior, deep, intense poetry and poetry that is, has access to great, you know, spiritual intensity that can only be done, I think, only be done in solitude with a kind of commitment to a mysterious world that you can't do in a crowd. And that poetry is still called for. And you have to be able also to take your experiences that are outside of yourself and bring them into your poetry and bring that poetry out into the world. And otherwise there's this terrible disjunct between what's considered like public poetry, which is inevitably sort of shallow and polemical, anthem-like, but shallow and polemical. So I think we need Vallejo out there. I think we need Ceylon out there. I think we need Neruda out there. I think we need, you know, Emily Dickinson out there, and Whitman and contemporary poets who are writing ironic, disjunctive verse, as well as performance, as well as what might be considered a kind of public verse. Because poetry is vital to mental health. I believe that we need poetry, you know, as much as we need food. And so we just wouldn't have as many problems as a culture if more people were writing it. That's what I really think. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, but I think that like if people like Joe Biden or somebody like that who believes in drone bombing were really sitting down and writing poetry that was, you know, contacting that kind of reality, they wouldn't be so corny, you know, about their lives, and it would be deep. Reality would just be deeper. So I hope as Occupy goes on that we can have, you know, poets' blogs, and that it can be good poetry and not just, you know, blah blah blah. You know, let's just put down anything. I think we need good poetry out there, and keeping on working at it in that way. So. Yeah, I think, is that good? Okay, thank you so much. I'm happy to sign books if anybody has any.
That's books. We'll hang out. We could use some help of some strong people to get this back into a living room format. Greg, you know the drill. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming here. Thanks for your support of SPLAB, and we'll see you in the future. Please, another hand for Brenda Hillman, our